Welcome to Season 2, Episode 1 of Proud Peeps. I could not be more excited with my guest today, Kyle McDowell. He's a transformative business leader in corporate America and now a best-selling author. Welcome to the show, Kyle.
Hey, Justin, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me today.
Before we get into it, I noticed that you seem to be a Travis Scott Air Jordan 1 fan. Is it the one pair of shoes with the pink laces, or do you have a set?
I have a couple of pair of Travis Scott Jordans. Good eye, man. Yeah, I'm so there, and there's a message behind that. Not a message, but there is a method to that madness. So, for the benefit of your audience, I spent nearly 30 years in big corporate America, and for most of those years, I had the starchiest of shirts and the most uncomfortable of leather-soled shoes that you've ever seen or worn. And I made a promise to myself right around the time I started to write the book that I was going to be me, and I like wearing Jordans. And oh, by the way, they're a hell of a lot more comfortable. So it's just kind of my uniform now is grabbing the right pair of Jordans when I go on stage to make sure that A, I'm comfortable, but B, it kind of looks cool. I'm a big fan of those.
It looks so cool with the blazer,
Thanks,
the cool
man.
shirt with the colored buttons and the shoes. I'm a big Air Jordan fan. My son, who's 20, got me into them a couple years ago, and definitely it is the style to go with, whether it's high tops or low, depending on the situation. But I'm a huge fan as well, so I couldn't get past that obvious point that I saw in some of the pictures. But
Cool.
the reason I had you on today is actually almost entirely selfish and personal. I just went through what I felt was a very rough tenure at my last company. It was a toxic workplace, fear-based, and it was very focused on I's. I would correct people all the time and say, hey, this is about we, say we, not I. And I left that place. It was infuriating kind of going through that process. And I left that place. And my confidence was at my lowest point for a variety of reasons. My self-esteem was pretty low. I ended up finding your book on Amazon. I can't remember the search that I did, but Begin with We. And I started reading it. We had some similar backgrounds in the call center space. And you had me hooked when you first started talking about a culture is not about those 6 words that you put up on a wall. It's really about how you operate on a daily basis. Can you kind of talk a little bit about your journey in creating the Begin with We?
Yeah, I'd love to. And before I jump into that, I just need to share how grateful I am that the book has had an impact on you, especially during a challenging time. And I hate that you had that experience, man. But if I'm able to contribute to some of that rebound, then boy, that means a lot to me. But the environment you describe is not dissimilar, I think, than what many of us have experienced throughout our career. So I started my career from very, very humble beginnings, tiny cubicle for a regional bank, and just managed to work my way up through the corporate ranks, and ultimately found myself leading tens of thousands of people. But the weirdest kind of mind-bending mind F, if I could just say it that way, that I experienced throughout that journey was with each with each bigger step or bigger role or bigger scope and bigger paychecks. The only other thing that increased right along with those big numbers and the fancy titles and all that was the apathy for the environments that I actually helped create. So said differently, man, my career I was doing things and found myself in positions that were beyond my wildest dreams. A lot of that was ego, candidly. But when you wake up one morning and realize that you don't want to go to work and be a part of an environment that you actually crafted, it messes with you. And I realized probably around year 22, maybe 23 of my career that I started to ask a lot of questions. Is there a better way? Or has everybody else just had all this corporate Kool-Aid and nobody's honest about how they're really feeling inside the workplace? So I started to do a little research and came up with, it kind of supported my position, this apathy that I was feeling. And it got so loud in my brain that I decided to step away from the corporate world for a while. And I was in a very lucky position. I was able to kind of plan to take a few months off and really didn't know where I was going to go next. But within a week or two, maybe 10 days after leaving, I got a phone call asking would I be interested in joining an organization where I would be asked to lead about 15,000 people. It's the same company that I mentioned in the book where these principles were developed. And ended up taking that role, but I assumed the role with a really clear understanding that I wanted to and needed to lead differently. I wanted to be the leader I never had. And that's what excited me about getting back into the fray was I was going to just make a pivot, a very conscious, purposeful pivot from being the hard charging, results at all costs, bang my fist on the desk guy to being a more collaborative, trying to really connect with my colleagues and those that work around me. But here's where the rubber hit the road. So I made the decision, joined the company. I'm on board for about 60 days. I haven't met my entire leadership team. I'd only met my direct reports. And I wanted to get in front of them and have some face time with them and just kind of learn more about the next couple of layers of our leadership team. So I brought all of our team, all the leaders into, the top 40 or 50 leaders, I should say, into Lawrence, Kansas. And the night before I was going to address this team, dude, I was terrified. I had no idea what I was going to say. The spirit or the spirit of the message had to be, I need you to be successful. And by that, I meant that very honestly. Like, there's no way I'll be successful in this role if we aren't doing this together. And I'd like to think you'd be better off having worked with me. In other words, not quite as strongly, but I'd like to think you need me. So then I got to thinking, it's like, well, what are the scenarios and the things that would drive you crazy in big corporate America that you now have an opportunity to not just talk about it, but actually change it with a massive organization. So that evening, I'm in my hotel room. It's probably midnight, and I'm faced with a blank PowerPoint. And I just said, all right, listen, I'm just going to start documenting what I want us to be known for, how we're going to treat each other. Number one, like what do we do for one another before we even talk about serving anybody externally? And Justin, maybe 2 hours later, I had these 10 sentences in front of me, and they each began and still do begin with the word we. And I'm not super creative, so here are the 10 we's. And they were my vehicle to kind of establish what I stood for as a leader. But more importantly, I think they established essentially rules for behavior. I think most companies do a really great job explaining how to do the role for which you've been hired. Like, check this box, check that box, whatever the SOP says, right? But I don't think we do a very good job of expressing and being pretty black and white about our rules or expectations of behavior, how you treat one another on this team, how you hold each other accountable, how you lift each other up, how you challenge each other, and you embrace those challenges. So it was kind of a wrapper for me to be, this is who we are, and this is how we're gonna lead and serve those that we serve externally. This is who we are, and that was back in 2017. 7 years later. The 10 We's are the cultural manifesto of that organization. Still, at this point, we've sold about 20,000 copies of the book, and I've worked with dozens of different organizations to implement the same principles. It's been such a gift. And I'll end with this. I know it's a long answer, but I'll end with this. At first, when the principles started to take off, and I was getting asked to do keynotes and come visit different companies and speak with leaders and leadership teams, it became clear to me that there's a place in the world for this message, and that so many of us have developed that sense of apathy. And this, at least for many so far, including myself, and it sounds like at least a small degree to you, has been kind of the antidote to that, which is something I'm very proud of.
And you should. I mean, it's fantastic. I wanted to pull out a few of the we's And it was very difficult to select a handful because all of them resonate 100%. Like I would challenge anybody to disagree with the purpose of any one of the 10 we's. But the ones that I wanted to talk about, one is something that I would always share with my team. And you put it more succinctly, but it's we do what we say we're going to do. I think that that is unbelievably critical, not just for the boss to make sure that what you said you're going to do, then I can meet my deadlines. It's for everybody else on the team, like you said. We take action, we pick each other up, and we measure by outcomes, not activities. I think that all four of those, and the other six, but all four of those have a great meaning in my life and the way that I lead, and they resonate. They're so succinct. You want to talk a little bit about the last one that I mentioned, which is we measure by outcomes, not activity. I think we've both seen it over and over again that, here are the 17 things I did today. An SDR called 50 different people. Well, what did that do? That didn't generate anything. You're measuring the wrong things, and they're not outcomes, they're activities. But you want to talk a little bit about that one in particular?
Yeah, you bet. For me, where I would become easily agitated before creating these principles is with the guy or gal. And you have to remember, man, I've worked in a couple of small-ish companies, but for the most part, I worked inside of like massive organizations, Fortune 10 companies. And there's this phenomenon that happens that I'm sure your audience is aware of. I know you've seen it, is the bigger the company, the easier it is to hide. And you can keep your head down and shuffle through the day, stay off any radar, if you will, make a pretty good living, have no fulfillment, have no impact, and kind of be seen as a hollow leader or somewhere in between. And that used to frustrate the hell out of me because I was always one that focused on getting results. How I got them has changed dramatically. As I mentioned, I'm less of a hard charging, bang my fist on the desk guy. But with that profile of person that keeps their head down, doesn't have a lot to say, just trying to stay off the radar, becomes this fascination with busy work. So for me to show that I'm adding value, I got to look busy. And that means, I'm going to have a packed calendar. I'm burning a lot of calories, but not necessarily the right calories towards the right end goal. And I love activity. Activity is important. It's very important, but it's not why we get paid. It's not, the real world doesn't judge us by our activity. And I'll go a step further, man. If your clients actually knew how much time you spent in meetings or doing non-value add activity that they don't see a tangible benefit, they're no better for you spending that time doing whatever it is that you're doing, they would be frustrated as well. They don't want that. They would be actually turned off by you to know that you were working so many hours doing so many things that didn't drive their outcomes a bit. I say this one all the time. I'm always really happy that my Uber driver puts gas in the car before they pick me up, but I'm not paying for that, man. I'm not paying for that time. I'm paying to get from point A to point B. That activity is a requirement for that outcome, but it's not the reason that they're in business. It's not why or how they make money. And I just felt like we need to be really direct about, I want to award milestones. I want to reward people for taking steps and progress towards ultimate outcomes. But at the end of the day, we all have a handful, if not maybe a few more, maybe a few less, of commitments, of obligations. They're on your performance appraisal, right? So if my advice to anyone that will listen is, if you find yourself engaged in activity that doesn't contribute to a better outcome of those handful of things for which you've been assigned, it should be scrutinized. Why am I doing this? Why am I, to what end? And that has always been a check for me to say, all right, am I heading down the right path, spending the right amount of time on the right things, or am I just enamored with how busy I am right now?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's one of my pet peeves is when people are saying, oh, I'm so busy. Well, one, everybody would say that if they all could. But, and I think in the book you talk about, you're sitting in a meeting room next to an executive who turned his computer towards you and they're like, look at how busy my schedule is. I'm booked from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And in reality, well, what are you actually achieving through that? Why should you actually be joining those other than just feeling like you're busy? And it is like none of those meetings from 8 to 6 are probably offering the value that's needed in order to drive to outcomes.
I think it's Justin. I think it's, and I'd love to get your reaction to this because I actually think it's worse than that because amazingly, well, let me back up. I think a lot of that's driven by ego. It's a sense of self-importance that I must be in these meetings, as many meetings as possible, to make sure that my voice is heard and I'm having input and I'm in control of the direction of this team. I think ego is a big part of that. But it's worse because if you don't show up as that leader that feels like you got to be in every meeting, you're proud of these 16 meetings that you had scheduled for the day, somehow the work still gets done. Mm-hmm. People still come up with better alternatives. They come up with plans. Now maybe, whatever the environment is might dictate you have a say in the final kind of next steps. But I have found that when you give the team enough space to actually think, not fulfill your orders, but actually think, what are we trying to do here? What are we trying to overcome? What are we trying to accomplish? Somehow they figure it out without you being there. As a matter of fact, you're sometimes a detractor slowing them down. So I think, checking that ego, be a little self-reflective on where's my time best spent? Where can I add the most value? I think those are two kind of threshold questions that allow us to really focus on outcomes versus just staying busy.
I agree. As an executive, you're probably more often than not inhibiting that ability for the team to be able to come up with the idea, whether collectively or individually, because they're all waiting for you to just be like, if you're that type of leader where they know that you're the only one that can make a decision, well, it ends up being the self-fulfilling prophecy that you actually, you may not need any of those people because it's actually just you doing it all, which you can't actually deliver anything of value if you're the only one.
It's kind of classic human nature in my mind. It's like, if I'm here and my team's here, if I step back a bit, literally as well as figuratively, and give them the space to step forward, that's what usually happens. But you never know unless you give that space and you encourage that growth and that thought. Otherwise, if you're just giving orders every day, you're going to get exactly what you want and nothing more, and including fulfillment.
One of the many good quotes that you have in the book that I keep on my desk here, especially after my last experience, but I think it's pertinent going forward. Many companies operate in an environment that fosters insecurity and fear versus creativity and innovation. You can take any one of those examples that you just talked about. It's the fear that you're going to be wrong in front of a group and your boss is going to get mad at you. So might as well just wait for them to, say what they need to just any number of things. I think that is, for my last 8-9 months in a nutshell, but I think it's really critical to help overcome that fear-based approach and things that foster insecurity. If I, as a senior executive who felt very confident my whole career, have been at the C-level for last 10-12 years, if I lost my confidence, if I was insecure, man, imagine all those other people that don't have the same ability or the background or those instances to prop themselves up. I mean, that fear and insecurity is a death knell.
It is. And I'm curious for you, and obviously we don't have to name names and be that specific, but was it one person or a group of people? Was it what drove you to feel the way that you felt?
I ended up trying to psychoanalyze the whole thing, and I thought it was one individual, and then I realized it was the leadership team that acted that way. There was one meeting that I attended at the end of my tenure where I was questioning, is it this one person or is it a group? And there's an analyst in the room, and it was the entire senior team with the analyst. And every time that anybody from the senior team was answering the analyst, they would look at the CEO for approval. And I was like, I think I just answered it. They have their own fear that they're going to say something wrong. And so it ended up being this cascading effect across multiple people within that leadership team. But definitely one individual in my world made it, pretty difficult. But I think it ended up being a systemic issue across the organization.
Do you think that individual was a product of the environment, or he had just kind of learned this is how you survive in this organization, this is how you thrive, or was it something that was just inherent with him and he just didn't get it?
Product of the environment and
Yeah.
having a new leadership role in the last few years. That's what that individual learned. Definitely learned environment. So I think it was a good human outside, but I think it was just you learn a lot of these different things, and you kind of mimic and copy in many ways what you see as other leaders or your boss or whatever. And I definitely think it was a product of the environment.
Yeah, that's I would have guessed that to be the case, which I think is a commentary for anyone that has any type of a position of authority. I don't want to say a boss because I think that's such a weird term, and you're not necessarily a leader, but anyone that has people reporting to them, the impact that you can have far beyond what you see is immense.
Yeah.
And my hunch is the fella that you became so frustrated with that ultimately kind of prompted you to think differently and take care of yourself and get out. He is a product of his environment, but he had an opportunity to break that cycle. He had an opportunity to do things differently. And I know that's hard. I know that's very difficult, especially when you're the higher in the organization. I know that's difficult. But it is a requirement for sustained success in my mind.
Yes. And I think that, folks I've worked with, whether it was a sales leader, whether it was, somebody in product or marketing, that's how they feel they need to operate. Like you're saying, you'd pound the fist into the table and be more direct and, and all that. And, maybe at the time thinking that was the way. And then you start realizing, oh, there's actually different ways. And I do think that these folks get stuck in an environment where they probably don't necessarily like how they operate, but they feel like that's the only way, and not really thinking about it and looking outside of their network or their group to learn from others. And I remember I worked with this one rep who was a total dick. I mean, total asshole. Sorry, I've always wanted to add the explicit thing in Spotify
it's that kind
and
of podcast.
Apple.
Let's go. I'm excited now.
And I was like, dude, why are you like this? He's like, this is the only way to get people to work with you. I'm like, you have a shelf life. You literally have a shelf life. The moment that you stop selling, you're going to be gone. And lo and behold, he's been, 2 years every job. And I think it's because there's only one way to operate. But he didn't realize it. He didn't realize that he was such a total jerk. But he didn't change even when people brought it up to him. Right. And so, but I think it's like, you just think there's only one way to operate.
Well, and that's the I think the conundrum that many of us find ourselves in. And I want to be really clear about this for your audience. It's like if you're in a scenario similar to what you just described, and you choose to keep your head down, not rock the boat, and just kind of drink that Kool-Aid, I have no disrespect. I got nothing but love for you. Because you have bills, you have commitments, we have things we got to take. I understand why people end up in the scenario they're in and end up, waking up 2 decades later with no leadership legacy, no fulfillment. They're apathetic towards their environment. They feel like, they look back and where's this time gone? I understand why that happens. But the moment you realize there is a better way and you commit to driving towards that better way, and that it might involve, and most times it does involve, you stepping away to another organization, another team, going to do something else. Because this just in, you're not going to change that CEO. You're not. You're not going to change. It's very rare. Are you able to change your boss, regardless of what level of the organization they sit? So you got to make that. You got to make that tough decision. And I've found that when we take 1 or 2 steps back, it usually results in 2 or 3 steps forward. But it's the uncomfortable, that leap that you're so familiar with now, that there is a better way, but we're just conditioned to think that this is how it's supposed to be. And, I'll stack the 401k and I'll retire in 40 years, but there's more to life than that.
Yeah. But to your point, I mean, all the love, because there's different motivations and, and maybe in 20 years they're not going to care about their legacy or leadership, and everybody's different. I think earlier in my career, that's where I started getting a little bit of struggle as a leader, is that, I would be like, this is something that I think that would be great for you. And they're like, yes. And then I would do a lot for them. And then I realized that there's multiple types of people. One, somebody who has ambition and wants to do something about it, latch onto them as a leader because they'll follow through and fulfill. There's others who pretend to have ambition but don't want to do anything about it. Those are the frustrating ones because you're trying to help and they're not doing anything about it. And then there's people who are totally content. Those are the easiest ones because you know where they sit. It's those middle ground where it's like I started to get so frustrated because they weren't taking the advice or pushing forward or whatever. It just wasn't their time to do that. And they just didn't have interest, and they were pretending they were, or they thought they did, but they weren't following through on it.
Yeah.
And I learned quickly that like they got to take the first couple of steps on their own and then prove that they actually want to do something more. And then I'm all on board to help them however they want. So
got to meet me halfway, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Amen.
So that brings us to the part of the show. I'm curious, what's made you most proud in your career? Notice I say career because everybody's like, oh, wife, family. I'm like, well, everybody's got to say that. So now I'm like, in your career.
I picked up on that. And I appreciate it. For me, it's creating these principles. There's not like one flash event that I would say that makes me the most proud, but I'll tell you a very quick story that in this I think will highlight the pride component of creating these principles. So, I created these principles back in 2017, rolled them out of the organization I was in, had taken them to another organization subsequent, wrote the book, became a USA Today, Wall Street Journal bestseller. I started to get a lot of requests for keynotes. So I'd travel the country and speak around about the value of we and how these principles can change your organization. And I gave a talk at Audi. And I've told this story before, but it's still touching to me. I gave a talk at Audi, and at the end of the hour and 15 minutes or so, this fella in the back, there's probably 70 leaders in an auditorium style room. And this fella in the back of the room raises his hand and says, by the way, before he spoke, he stood up, big, jacked, former Division I college football player, shaved head, Mr. Clean, really intimidating looking guy. Had the goatee, I believe, as well. And he stood up and I said, yes, sir. And he says, if you, to his peers, if you read this book or this man's book and you investigate and explore how these principles might help you, it will change everything. It's changed how I'm raising my children, and it's changed how I lead the boys that I lead for the high school football team that I coach. And dude, when someone tells me that these principles that I created in this book that I wrote is helping and has impact on how they raise their children, I don't know that I'm more proud of anything than that moment. And how it indicates the impact that, it seems to be the book and the principles seem to be having. So I think overall that's how I would that's how I'd answer the question. Yeah.
I love that. And, that's the entire purpose of you being on the show, because you helped me. And I know we were talking a little bit about it earlier in the green room. It's not green. That when do you start believing people's compliments, and how do you not have imposter syndrome? And it's very difficult, I'm sure, right? But to actually have someone stand up in their peers, it's hard not to believe that. Like, the guy didn't want anything from you, right? And like, I got chill. Like, you telling this story, I even got chills. Like, that's unbelievable. Like, that's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for understanding. It was a big one. I actually teared up because I was standing behind a podium. He says this. I didn't expect it at all. I started to tear up, and there's a stool behind me. I just sat back at the stool, and you guys, I got nothing else. I don't know where else I can say to add to that. And fellow's name is Brad. Great guy. Shout out to Brad if he's listening or watching. I noticed Brad got a little teary eyed as well. So it was a really, really special, cool experience. So thank you for allowing me to share it.
And was it one of those moments where it was like a George Costanza, where you're like, okay, and you walk out of the meeting like
That's how I felt, brother. That's how I didn't do it. That's how I felt. I mean, where do I go from there?
Yeah.
And it was a really cool moment. And I've heard similar points of feedback, but coming from this guy, it just seemed to really hit home. And I'm reminded of it when you asked the question.
Yeah, that's awesome. Two things. One, Have you noticed that anybody under 37, 40 doesn't know Seinfeld? It doesn't have any references to it. Have you picked up on that?
Gosh, I didn't know those people existed. Is that right?
Yeah.
Holy
Yeah.
shit. I
Yeah.
did
You can
not know
pretty,
that.
I use
I guess it's true.
Seinfeld references to gauge how old somebody is without asking, because if they get it, they're over 37 usually. The second thing is, when my son was like 6 or 7, we're looking at new cars or replace one of our cars, and he's like, "What kind of car does mom like? Is it an innie or an Audi?" Like a belly button. And so our license plate was INNI for a number of years,
How
because I
cute.
thought that was fantastic. So
That's adorable.
big
Yeah,
big
how
fan of
cute.
Audi
I
or
love
any.
it. I've never thought about Audi in that context, but now
I
I
know.
won't ever think about it not in that context.
Yeah. So since then, we felt the obligation to name every one of our cars. We have an electric car now. It's Wally, and
Sounds
so
appropriate.
it's fun. And we started naming Christmas trees, which I advise naming anything that you put in your house, because when we had to throw it away, the kids were like crying hysterically.
What was the tree's name?
Timbery.
Timber. What a great name. But Timbery met his fate, right?
Yeah. It was like it was putting down our dog and then getting rid of Timbery. We're like equal.
Wow. And anybody put down a dog can relate to that, brother. That is gut-wrenching stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, man. Well, with that, I wanted to once again thank you personally for helping me get through some tough times, gain my confidence back, and also to be on my show here to start off season 2. So thanks again, Kyle.
Well, the pleasure is all mine, and I can't let you go without just reiterating or mentioning something that I think is lost on so many people in the world today. So it sounds as if my book and my message has had an impact on you, which is like, it's the most heartwarming. I'm so moved by that. But when you share that you were impacted by someone else, you've won, because you are, hopefully better off for having read the book, or maybe I had some kind of impact on how you lead, maybe a little differently, or confirm stuff you already knew. That's so you benefited, but I benefited just as much. And that's what I think is lost on so many people, especially in the workplace. There's this for me to win, you have to lose mentality, or there's this dog eat dog, or survival of the fittest, whatever cliche you want to layer in there. But when you actually take the time to invest your care, spend the energy, ask the tough questions, give the tough answers, and try to really connect with those around you, they're better off for it. And as I just mentioned, you are better off for it. It's not a competition. So anyway, you have, by you sharing the impact that the book and I've had on you, you have had just the same impact on me. And I'm not pandering. I mean that sincerely. And I just think we all need to keep those things in mind and pay that stuff forward. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today, my man. And I look forward to watching your show grow, and I appreciate you allowing me to be a part of it.